Hi guys, it's ASBYT and this is the Oppo Find X2 Pro, and it's possibly my favourite smartphone around to buy right now in 2020. But with this phone, Oppo have made one pretty baffling decision. It's confusing, I don't get why they did it. What is it? Let's find out. So the Find X2 Pro has nearly all the bells and whistles expected of a 2020 flagship smartphone. The Qualcomm Snapdragon 865, up to 12GB of RAM and 512GB of storage, UFS 3.0 and a 6.7-inch Quad HD Plus OLED display with 120Hz refresh rate and 240Hz touch sensing. A pretty hefty triple camera setup, more on that later, all wrapped up in a wonderfully exquisite design package. The edge-to-edge curves at the front, with just a small punch hole cut out top left, housing of course that front camera, gives an impressive 93.1% screen to body ratio. The matte orange textured leather on the rear, which is actually a really welcome change from the glossy glass finishes that we're so often used to. All topped off by a luxurious gold trim which also covers the buttons, ports, camera housing and badge. It really makes you feel like you're holding a bit of a gem. The attention to detail has even gone as far as the small details like the indentation on the top and bottom bezels, and that only reinforces that premium feel. And if you're not a fan of orange, it also comes in ceramic black. But it's not just pretty, it's not just style over substance, this phone can really deliver. The mentioned 120Hz display combined with the 7nm Snapdragon chip and the latest Android 10 means it feels like one of the fastest phones on the planet. Oh, and guess what? You can actually set the refresh rate to 120 and have a Quad HD Plus display all at the same time. Samsung. Oppo's ColorOS skin has also seen some pretty huge improvements. It's cleaner, animations beautifully aid the high refresh rate, and they've customized some great features like dark mode, swipe down search, and navigation gestures. There are still a fair amount of bloatware apps, but you can of course just remove them. And with a much more stock Android feel, dare I say it, it's kind of morphing a little bit into OnePlus's Oxygen OS. That's certainly not a bad thing, it's just something that I picked up. The cameras are also equally impressive, but only in parts. We've got a primary 48MP Sony IMX689 sensor. We've also got a 48MP ultra wide angle lens as well. And we've got a 13MP periscope telephoto lens, which is capable of 10 times hybrid zoom and up to 60 times digital zoom. So normal photos on the whole are very sharp, vibrant, with good dynamic range, and with the ultra wide angle lens being 48MP as well, it helps to give you great sharpness and detail even in those wide shots. Noticeable, especially if you decide to crop in. The 60 times zoom on the periscope lens is really quite a feat, but like with Samsung's 100 times zoom, I wouldn't say those 60 times zoom shots are necessarily usable. But the real magic happens at the 5 times and 10 times zoom, and even up to 30 times zoom as well, where you can get some really usable and great shots. The front camera also provides you with a decent quality snap, certainly good enough for all your social media, and the images are actually surprisingly pretty sharp and detailed compared to a lot of other Chinese smartphones, which tend to apply a sort of skin smoothing filter to your portraits. Now in early testing, the video is a bit of a gift and a curse. 4K at 60 frames a second max on the rear, but again, the sweet spot for me is probably 4K at 30 frames a second, where you get some really pretty impressive stabilization as well. Unfortunately, the front camera tops out at 1080p at 30 frames a second, which is certainly not horrific, but by 2020 standards, I personally think 4K at 30 or at least 1080p at 60 frames a second should be really the minimum on a front-facing camera. Now the stereo speakers are brilliantly loud and certainly competitive enough in terms of sound quality, and the fingerprint scanner and Face ID are literally ridiculously quick. So you've heard a lot of good things, but as you know, no device is ever perfect, and it does have some compromises. No wireless charging, no headphone jack, no expandable storage, and battery cell size may be a possible concern as well. While the 4260 mAh seems a pretty decent capacity, if you're using the phone at 120Hz and Quad HD Plus resolution, it can be a complete battery killer. But overall, in the time I've had it, the battery has seemed to have held up pretty well, and I've had it at 120Hz refresh rate and Quad HD Plus resolution pretty much across the board. Also, I can kind of see why Oppo didn't want to go with a massive battery cell, because there's a fine line between great battery life and then turning your phone into a massive heavy brick. Something that both the Asus ROG Phone 2 from last year and the Galaxy S20 Ultra both struggle with a little bit. Pretty heavy phones, whereas the Find X2 Pro feels pretty light in comparison. Furthermore, one of Oppo's secret weapons is of course their 65 watt Super VOOC or Super VOOC Charging. You can charge this phone from completely dead and flat to full in just over half an hour. Absolute number madness. So as you can tell so far, I'm pretty in love with this phone. But I've also been left completely and utterly confused by Oppo's marketing strategy. Oppo are a huge smartphone manufacturer, I think 4th or 5th biggest in the world in terms of market share last year. Similar to Xiaomi, probably only really behind Apple, Samsung and Huawei. But their main notoriety is in China and India, where recently it seems the biggest explosion of smartphone sales has come in the sort of mid-range or upper mid-range, the flagship killer territory. And pricing wise, this just doesn't fit into that category. Furthermore, in the West, where prices tend to be a little bit higher, the likes of the UK, Europe and America, outside of tech enthusiasts like you and I, if you stopped an average consumer in the street and said, would you consider buying the new Oppo phone? They may look at you a little bit strange. Putting it politely, as huge as Oppo are, especially in China and India, their reach in the West just isn't as big as the likes of Apple and Samsung, and even to some extent Huawei. So with all this considered, it seems absolutely baffling to me that Oppo have priced the Find X2 Pro at €1,200. I can't see, again, especially in the West, an average consumer going into a phone store being offered the latest from Samsung, the latest from Apple, and the latest from Oppo, all at around the same sort of price, and them leaving the store with an Oppo phone. Of course, it's all about how the brand is perceived for the average consumer. But even more baffling than that, Oppo's sister company OnePlus will be releasing their flagship device, the OnePlus 8 Pro, in about a month or so, with pretty much identical internals, a very, very similar design, and if last year's anything to go by with the OnePlus 7 Pro, they're going to be pricing it at around $700, $1,200, $700. I don't get it. And yes, I have gone through puberty, although you wouldn't have guessed it through that. The Oppo Find X2 Pro is a brilliant, brilliant phone. It's just a crazy price. That's of course just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Like and share if you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you're new to the channel and love everything tech, breaking tech news, unboxings, reviews. I love you and leave you. I'll see you in the next one. Stay security. Peace out.